The wind came before the knock. It always did out here, rolling across the flatlands like a warning, bending the tall grass low, rattling the tin roof of the old barn until the horses shifted and stamped in their stalls. Mara Calloway had lived on this land long enough to read its moods the way other women read faces. Tonight, the wind was uneasy. She was already awake when it happened. 3 knocks. Deliberate. Not frantic, which somehow made it worse. The clock on the nightstand read 3:47 a.m. The nearest town was 22 miles east. The nearest neighbor was 6 miles down a dirt road that flooded every spring and hadn't been properly passable in 3 weeks. Out here, in the deep dark of the Wyoming high plains, 3 knocks at your door before 4 in the morning meant exactly one thing. Something had gone wrong for someone. She didn't reach for the light. She reached for the rifle. People in town sometimes called her self-sufficient. They meant it as a compliment and she accepted it as one. Though what they didn't understand was that self-sufficiency wasn't a personality trait for Mara. It was a scar that had healed hard. Daniel had been gone 6 years. A horse accident. Fast, senseless, the kind of thing that didn't ask permission and didn't leave room for negotiation. He'd been 34. She'd been 31. And the 412 acres of Calloway Ranch had passed entirely into her hands on a gray Tuesday morning in October while the ground was still too hard to dig. She'd buried him anyway. Found a way. That was what she did. She found a way. She fixed the fencing alone in January winds. She managed the cattle rotation and the hay contracts and the ancient plumbing that groaned like something dying every February. She learned to live inside her own silence until it stopped feeling like loss and started feeling like strength. She trusted the land. She trusted her dogs. She trusted her rifle. People were a different matter. The knock came again. Same rhythm, same patience. And Mara moved through the dark house without turning on a single light. Her bare feet certain on the worn floorboards, the rifle held low but ready. She reached the front door and pressed her back to the wall beside it. "Who's there?" Her voice came out level. That was important. A pause. Then a man's voice. Low, careful, each word placed like something fragile. "I need help. I'm not a threat to you. I just need help." She almost laughed at that. Almost. She opened the door with the rifle raised and her finger beside the trigger guard. He was tall, she registered that first. Then the blood. Dark, soaked through the left side of his jacket from somewhere below the ribs. One hand pressed against it, the other raised, open-palmed at shoulder height. His face was sharp-boned and weathered, the kind of face that had spent years outdoors. His eyes, even in the thin rectangle of light falling through the doorway, were dark and steady. He wasn't panicking. That was the strange thing. A man bleeding in the middle of the night on a stranger's porch. And he wasn't panicking. He looked at the rifle without flinching. He looked at her like he understood exactly what she was weighing and had already accepted either outcome. "I can wait here," he said quietly. "If that's easier for you." Her jaw tightened. Her eyes moved to the darkness behind him. The porch, the yard, the pale gravel drive, the black wall of tree line beyond. Nothing moved. No headlights. No sound except the wind. She stepped back from the door. "In," she said. "Hands where I can see them." She put him at the kitchen table. He told her his name was Cade. Just Cade. He told her he'd been on the county road about 2 miles west when things had gone bad and he'd seen her light, though she hadn't had a light on, which meant he'd known she was here some other way. She filed that away and said nothing. She cut his jacket open with kitchen shears and cleaned the wound with the efficiency of a woman who had stitched animals in the field since she was 12. It was a deep laceration, something bladed, not a bullet, and it was ugly, but it had missed anything critical. He didn't make a sound while she worked. He watched the wall. "You want to tell me how this happened?" she asked. "Not especially. You want to tell me if whoever did it is going to show up at my property?" A pause. Longer than she liked. "I don't think so tonight," he said. She tied off the last bandage and stepped back and looked at him. He looked back. There was no performance in him, no charm, no deflection. Just a man being precisely as honest as he'd decided to be, and no more. She made coffee. She didn't offer it. She simply set a mug in front of him and took her own to the counter and stood with her back to the window and her eyes on him. The rifle was leaning against the wall 3 feet to her left. They stayed like that for a long time. The house made its noises. The wind pushed on the glass. Somewhere around 5 in the morning, Cade stood, slowly, deliberately telegraphing every movement, and walked to the back door and looked out at the barn. "Your gate latch on the paddock," he said. "Third post from the left. It's pulling away from the wood. Another hard wind and it'll go." She looked at him. "I can see it from here," he said simply and sat back down. She drank her coffee and said nothing, but she noted it. By mid-morning he was on his feet more than he should have been. She didn't tell him to rest. He wouldn't have listened. Instead she watched from the kitchen window as he moved slowly around the exterior of the barn, not inspecting it with the curiosity of a stranger but with the quiet assessment of someone who understood working land. He didn't touch anything. He just looked. She brought him a plate of food at noon without announcing she would. Set it on the fence post near where he was standing. Walked back to the house. When she glanced out 20 minutes later, the plate was empty and he had fixed the paddock latch. She hadn't asked him to. She stood at the window for a moment and felt something shift inside her chest that she didn't have a name for and didn't go looking for one. She saw the truck at 2:30. It came up the Eastern Ridge Road, slow and without urgency, which was worse than fast. 2 men. She recognized the truck before she recognized the driver. A dark blue Silverado with a cracked rear panel that belonged to Gary Hennessy, a man with county connections she'd had trouble with twice before over a land survey dispute. He didn't come to visit. He came to pressure. She stepped onto the porch and her eyes moved to Cade, who had gone absolutely still near the barn. His stillness was different now. Controlled. Compressed. He knew the truck. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, in the way his body had shifted from the looseness of a convalescing man to something older and more dangerous. He turned and found her eyes across the yard, and in that look there was an entire conversation that neither of them had the time to speak. She gave him one short nod. He gave her one back. The truck stopped. Gary Hennessy climbed out first, thick through the chest, slow smile, the particular confidence of a man who'd never been seriously told no. The second man stayed near the vehicle, arms folded, eyes moving across the property. "Mara." Hennessy touched the brim of his hat. "Didn't know you had company." "I don't," she said. "He's a hired hand." "What do you want, Gary?" "Just passing. Heard there was some trouble on the county road last night." His eyes slid to Cade. "Checking in on neighbors." "I'm fine. Glad to hear it." He took one step forward. "Thing is, we're looking for something that went missing. Thought maybe it passed through this way." Cade walked forward from the barn. Slow. Unhurried. He stopped at Mara's left shoulder like he'd stood there 100 times before. Hennessy's eyes changed. "You should go," Cade said. Nothing else. No threat in the tone. No performance. Just a fact laid down on the gravel between them. What followed was fast. The second man moved first, reaching, not speaking. Mara was already off the porch steps. Cade went left. She went right. The rifle came up and she put a round into the dirt 3 feet ahead of Hennessy's boots, and the sound of it cracked across the flat land like something breaking in half. Everything stopped. Hennessy stood very still. The second man had Cade's forearm locked, and was finding rapidly that this was a serious mistake. Cade moved once, efficient, economical, and the man sat down hard in the dirt with the shocked expression of someone who had just learned something new and painful about the world. Silence. Wind. "My land," Mara said. "My rules. Get off it." They got off it. She sat on the porch steps after the truck disappeared. Her hands were steady, they always were in the moment. It was afterward that cost her. Cade sat beside her, and for a while neither of them spoke. Then he said, "I knew your husband." She turned to look at him. "Not well. Years ago, before he had this place. We worked the same operation in Montana for one season." He looked out at the flat horizon. "He talked about you. Said he'd met a woman who was harder than the land and softer than she let on." A pause. "Said if anything ever happened, there were people he trusted and people he didn't. He listed you. The air went out of her slowly. That's why my door, she said. That's why your door. She looked down at her hands. The evening light was going gold and long across the grass. A muscle worked in her jaw. 6 years she'd carried this land and this silence and the clean, hard weight of being completely alone in it. And now this. A stranger on her porch who had known Daniel's voice, who had carried her name in his pocket like a compass point, who had bled his way 2 miles across dark country to find her specifically. "What did Hennessy take from you?" she asked. "Evidence," he said. "That's all I'll say. Enough to make certain people uncomfortable." He glanced at her. "I have it back now." She nodded slowly. That was enough. For now it was enough. He was up before her in the morning. She found him in the kitchen. Coffee already made, her mug already filled, sitting on the counter where she always left it. He was standing at the window with his own cup, looking out at the barn, and he was dressed for travel. She poured her coffee and stood beside him, and they watched the light come up together, pink and clean over the eastern grass. "The paddock latch will hold," he said. "I know. The corner post on the south fence is soft, about 8 inches down. You'll want to replace it before winter." "I know that too." He nodded, finished his coffee, set the mug in the sink. She walked him to the door. He put on his jacket, the old one she'd cut, now roughly pinned closed, ridiculous looking, and he wore it like it was fine. At the door he turned. "He was proud of you," Cade said. "I thought you should hear that from someone who heard him say it." Her throat closed. She didn't trust her voice, so she didn't use it. She held out her hand. He took it, a firm, brief grip, the handshake of 2 people who had been through something and come out the other side. Then he walked down the drive and the morning took him. 3 weeks later, Mara was replacing the south fence post. She dug down the 8 inches and found the rot exactly where he'd said it would be, and as she worked the old post free, she felt something beneath the soil's surface, something that wasn't root or rock. She dug it out with her gloved hand. A flat river stone, small, smooth, dark gray, the kind you'd pick up without thinking, the kind that fit perfectly in a palm. She turned it over. Nothing carved, nothing written, just a stone. But it hadn't been there before. She knew this land. She knew every inch of it. She stood up slowly in the morning light, the stone warm in her hand despite the cold, and she looked out over the 412 acres of Calloway Ranch, at the fixed latch, the winter-ready fence line, the horses moving easy in the far paddock, and something in her chest, that unnamed thing, finally settled. She didn't know where he'd gone. She didn't know if she'd ever see him again. But she kept the stone on the windowsill above the kitchen sink, where the morning light could find it, where she could find it, every single day. And the rancher never forgot him.